Institute of Technology in Ireland, who's going to talk on Cezanne. And we have Murray Jardine, who is from Auburn University, who's going to talk about political implications of Poteat. So we'll have both presentations, and then at the end, we'll have about 20 minutes, is what he's got scheduled, and we stay with the schedule for questions. So.
Okay, first of all, my apologies for not having time to post this on the website. But as you'll recognize when I go through it, it's not really fully resolved, and all I can really deliver is a segment of it. But I hope to be able to give you some flavour of what I'm working on. If not, if it appears to be still lunacy, I hope that it's intended in an amicable way, so I appear, nothing more than an amiable lunatic. If a lunatic. Okay, so I begin with a quotation from Recovering the Ground, from the, as you see, from the introduction or prolegomena from that text. It says, the reader of my text, and I think we've heard this already at some point in the conference, where Poteat likens the reader of his text to a beholder of Cézanne's paintings of pine trees and rocks. He cannot work his way through to the far side of things with an unimpeded gaze, because all of the boulders right in front of him that he has first to climb over. So he actually identifies with Cézanne's pictorial project. And then the second one is, and I know Heidegger is quite a controversial figure to invoke in this setting. Nevertheless, Heidegger in Heraclitus Seminar, which is very late discussion, says the body phenomenon is the most difficult problem. So, this paper examines the role of art in the philosophy of William Poteat. Simple as that. The examination of the role of art in Poteat's philosophy is motivated by the attempt to understand and ultimately explain how aesthetic experience contributed to the development of his primary philosophical concerns. Poteat's objective to retrieve the fundamental ontological ground of all meaning and meaning discernment, which we've heard a lot about over the last day and a half, this discovery led to the recovery or the retrieval of the bedrock fact of our sentient, motile and oriented mind-body in the world, as we know. Now, this, he also describes or identifies as a kind of anamnesis, a recovery or a retrieval, a recollection of something that we ourselves have forgotten. And the way I see as well the mind-body is, Poteat's fundamental category. To describe this is as a kind of a portmanteau, the way Joyce put words together, to create a gestalt that is a configuration of, or a conjunction of two things, but it's more than the sum of the parts. Together, they're more than the sum of the parts. So that's how I see the mind-body. So, moving along, this discovery came about as the result of a search for a post-critical method based on Polanyi's exposition of tacit knowing and necessitating the development of a sui generis approach, self-identified as reflexive phenomenology. That's important for where I want to take this in relation to Cézanne's painting.
Kieran?
Yeah?
I don't want to sidetrack, but could you just give me a quick understanding of what sui generis in this context means?
Coming out of itself, totally original.
Okay.
Coming out of itself, totally original. Those both are the two connotations of that Latinism. To casual readers of Poteat, art might be considered to function as a catalyst for the stimulation of this thinking necessary to ignite this project, for the thinking necessary to ignite this project. You'll have to ignore some of the typos in this. I hope they're not so obvious. And this is an accurate, if superficial, observation. I was struck by Diane's paper as well, where the way he read texts was as catalysts to stimulate his own thinking. And this is an accurate, if superficial, observation. To those who identify in Poteat's efforts to escape from the inherited epistemological schematics and intractable dualisms of the Western metaphysical tradition, to those who recognize in that a profound and radical program, his engagement with art may seem more significant and necessary. To this way of thinking, indeed, it may not be overstated to regard art as featuring as a kind of agency of transformative anamnesis in Poteat's work. An agency of transformative anamnesis. That's how he understood it. So art is recognized by Poteat as a mode of thinking, as intimating a mode of thinking, as I say here, alternative to the hegemonic cognitive orthodoxies of the metaphysical heritage. Art, therefore, because how he understands art is that it encapsulates a latent philosophical energy with the potential capacitance to overcome the systematic alienation of the self that represents that heritage's most salient element. Now, the motivation for this philosophical deference to art, okay, is best stated, I believe, by paraphrasing the Russian formalist Shkovsky, sorry for my pronunciation, pardon my French, as Richard Harris used to say, but only on the racetrack. When he says that art provides non-conceptual access to things as they are perceived and not as they are known. So art provides access to things as they are seen, not as they are known. And as they are known in this case can be paraphrased as, or can be reparsed as, represented according to some conceptual scheme or under some theoretical framework. Visual art is prioritized in this exposition. Few have attempted to evaluate Poteat's use of art in the elaboration of the initiating premises of his arguments, and little effort has been made to develop a systematic understanding of the effect his engagement with art had on the genesis of his distinctive methodology and the subsequent structure of his argument. I tried to redress this deficit to a certain extent with a strategy that will at first be textual and empirical. Certain episodes of his writing where he makes reference to or discusses visual art will be identified and then examined in detail in the effort to assess how they work. Okay, that is to say, artistic references, pictorial examples, images, motifs will be explored with regard to their function in Poteat's text, in order to ascertain what impact they might be considered to have on the amplification of his ideas. An overall objective, with no guarantees of being satisfied, will be to determine, firstly, what consequences Poteat's engagement with art has for our understanding of aesthetic experience in general. And secondly, in relation to this, as a consequence of it, I think we will be in a better position to diagnose what contribution Poteat's brief but explosive discussions of art may be considered to make to the philosophy of art, and perhaps in the context of development since Merleau-Ponty's phenomenological analysis of Cézanne. A very important paper called Cézanne's Doubt. I have Cézanne's Belief. Right? Okay. And that more or less sums the paper up, the argument of the paper up. I need not go any further, but I will. It's not an exaggeration to say, okay, again, I know I'm in company of people who know Poteat much better than I do, but I'll stick my neck out here and say that Cezanne was a constant presence in Poteat's philosophy. A presence, that is to say, contemporaneous with his engagement with Polanyi and developing synchronously with it. Early in his own contribution to Intellect and Hope, the anthology of essays on Polanyi that he edited with Langford, in discussing the way in which an individual person arises out of a subpersonal ground, an anonymous and prediscursive ontological matrix, so to speak, so the person arises out of a subpersonal ground, Poteat observes that preparatory to assuming possession of ourselves, we emerge out of a pre-personal, prehistoric background in order to achieve a fully reflexive subjectivity. Acquiring the concept of the self is consolidated through mastery of the use of the proper name, henceforth used to refer exclusively to that self. Yet, according to the early Poteat, despite the epistemic sophistication of the process of self-identity, we nevertheless always bear within ourselves roots that reach into this anonymous background, into this subpersonal background. To exemplify the intuited subpersonal connectedness he refers to here, Poteat refers to Cezanne. That's my point. In his landscapes, he suggests, the origin of the scene in his bodily being has been interlocked with that of the scene in a way that simultaneously manifests those reflexive ontological contacts that conjoin the being of the self to the being of the landscape. There's your reference. This is how Poteat interprets Cézanne's notorious statement, I wait until the landscape thinks itself in me, I am its consciousness. A statement that when looking at the Poteat, Bebamu, again, please, pardon my French, but let me see if I can find this work, the Poteat.
Turning the lights off.
Yeah, at the risk of everybody dozing off to sleep, including myself.
We promise.
So, this is that painting. Now, unfortunately, I have to toggle between painting and work because I haven't learned this off yet. I do intend to. That he is inclined, looking at this work, the work that I've just shown you, and that's the work that he refers to. Poteat says, or Cezanne, Poteat takes Cezanne's claim, I wait until the landscape thinks itself in me, and he is inclined to understand this literally. Oh yeah, that's not fair actually. So, one of Merleau-Ponty's few sporadic references to the painter in his Phenomenology of Perception can assist the interpretation of this gnomic comment, and at the same time help to understand Poteat's inclination towards its literal acceptance. In Cezanne, we remark the way the subjectivity, according to Merleau-Ponty, penetrates into the object by perception, assimilating its structure into the substance. Yet at the same time, we intuit that the nature of this reciprocal dynamic, when looking at the painting, was somehow already motivated by the object. This intuitive process, what Cezanne referred to as his motive, and this is a very important concept and category for Poteat as well. There's a whole footnote in Polanyian Meditations about the motive. I could include in this, I haven't. Is commented on a footnote where, and this is Merleau-Ponty's footnote now, Merleau-Ponty observes, it is this appropriation of the motive in its full sense that Cezanne only achieved after hours of meditation. We are germinating, he would say, after which suddenly everything would fall into place. So more thinking than painting. According to Merleau-Ponty, more viewing, more perception than painting. According to Merleau-Ponty, in other words, at a certain point, it becomes impossible to distinguish between what sees and what is seen, what paints and what is painted. In Cezanne, ultimately, he recognized the kind of direct and immediate, primordial contact with living reality that he was employing the phenomenological method to describe his own research. Yeah, to describe his own research, sorry. He acknowledges in the painter an identical preoccupation with sensation and the embodied self's opening to the world, with the reciprocal intersections where self and world are given mutually informed expression. Prior to any theoretical explanation, perception therefore must be regarded as a function of intentional activity, the action of an exploratory conscious body already deeply involved with the world. Indeed, Merleau-Ponty, when discussing the phenomenological significance of such aesthetic practice, urged that it should motivate us to take the romantic notion of inspiration seriously. But what he meant by this was unorthodox. Perception for the painter is a special category. It ought to be regarded in terms of the means for being present at the fission of being from the inside, the fission at its termination, and not before I come back to myself. Clearly influenced by Merleau-Ponty, and not just in his choice of artistic exemplar, Poteat thematizes the significance of Cezanne for his account of linguistic agency by mediation through Polanyi's categorically related subsidiary focal, tacit explicit, and proximal distal distinctions. He concludes, Poteat concludes, in all our personal acts of articulate assertion, we are relying proximally upon our inarticulate, tacit, and always incorrigible commitment to the privileged and paradigmatic reality for each of us, our own bodies in the world. Okay, and this is published in 1968, as you know. Later in the same essay, he renders this proposition more assertively, claiming that when a sentence is expressed, its connection with extra-linguistic reality must be a function of what he calls a precritical and proximal reliance. That is to say, a prior ontological dependence on the body as background condition. Therefore, the truth of a statement for Poteat depends on the ontologically irreducible and necessary fulcrum of the body, the worldly vehicle, as it were, of discourse. A true statement discloses reality by being grasped exactly where the lineaments of the body impinge on and physically mediate the world, thus, through its expression, revealing the nature of that reality. What Cezanne's work discloses... Oh, okay. Cool. Okay. All right. Looking at Cezanne's quarry, for instance, is not just a matter of appreciating how optical reflectances are made to elucidate naturally cold, dark forms. Rather, for Poteat, it involves a more visceral response than that. To experience Cezanne is to feel the substance of the world intentionally take hold of you, informing you and resonating, as it were, synchronously from the inside and demanding a response. To feel in the way Peter Hoig describes Miss Smilla's feeling for snow, or sense of snow. Reading snow, he says, is like listening to music. To describe what you've read is to try to explain music in writing. Okay, try to explain music in writing. Not describe it, but explain it. Sorry. And here, an attempt to define this feeling, I would request your indulgence, while I seek to retrieve a scholastic concept appropriated by Gerard Manley Hopkins, to identify at once the aesthetic objective of his poetry and an ontological principle, namely Inscape, meaning some modality, inadequately identified with Heraclitus's logos, a particular, distinct and irreducible yet shared form. For Hopkins, Inscape, the sudden sensing of fundamental forms underlying or more accurately hidden within the rhythmic flux of nature, can be activated through the perception of aesthetic form. I thought how sadly the beauty of Inscape was unknown and buried away from simple people, Hopkins writes, and yet how near at hand it was if they had eyes to see it, and it could be called out everywhere again. Such a concept, the concept of Inscape, is highly germane to Poteat's interpretation of Cezanne, but also, I would argue, key to the understanding of the guiding aesthetic of the painter's practice. Also, the etymological association with the Polanyian concept of indwelling should not be overlooked. We'll return to this below. In fact, we don't, but... but I want to point out here the Heraclitian logos, okay, that Poteat refers to frequently as the integrating, organizing principle of the mind-body, integrating its perceived particulars. Okay. Ultimately, for Poteat and Merleau-Ponty before him, Cezanne's art represents an instance of phenomenology articulated through the pictorial logos of painting rather than philosophical discourse. This, I believe, more than anything else, explains why Poteat, following Merleau-Ponty, invests so much in visual art and especially dwells inordinately on the world-disclosing aesthetic of Cezanne. But the question remains, why Cezanne? Why not Picasso? Why not Rothko? What is it about his style that has such a profound influence on Merleau-Ponty's phenomenology, as well as on Poteat's philosophical views? Such a question can really only be partially addressed at this juncture, pending a more thorough treatment later. However, prior to progressing further, it might be helpful to stop here and suggest a provisional answer. Such can be provided, I think, at this point by deferring to the work of another philosopher. In the phenomenology of modern art, Paul Crowther clarifies why Cezanne occupies a privileged place in Merleau-Ponty's phenomenology by explaining that his artwork enacts a kind of bonding of subject and world. It is not just this achievement in itself that is significant, however, rather much more important for Merleau-Ponty, according to Crowther,